The moment someone's words sting, your mind doesn't ask, is this true? It asks, am I in danger? What if your defensiveness isn't a personality flaw, but a survival reflex that's quietly ruining your peace? Welcome to Quiet Discipline Method. If you've ever replayed a comment in your head for hours, felt suddenly small after a harmless remark, or walked away from conversations carrying a weight you couldn't explain, this isn't because you're weak. It's because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. Taking things personally is not about sensitivity. It's about safety. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for threats. Thousands of years ago, those threats were physical. Today, they're psychological: rejection, judgment, loss of belonging. When someone says something ambiguous, your brain doesn't pause to investigate intent. It reacts instantly, and it reacts as if your worth is under attack. That's why the pain feels so real. That's why your body tightens before your mind catches up. That's why logic fails you in those moments. Most people think I take things personally because I care too much. But that's not accurate. You take things personally because, somewhere inside, you are not fully convinced that you are enough. When your sense of self isn't stable, every external comment becomes a verdict. Every tone becomes evidence. Every pause becomes meaning. And so the mind does what it thinks is helpful. It goes on the defensive. It tells a story. They're attacking me. They don't respect me. They think I'm inadequate. This story feels automatic. It feels true. It feels personal. But what's actually happening is far more primal. You are trying, unconsciously, to create safety by controlling perception. By interpreting first, by protecting yourself before you can be hurt. And in the short term, this strategy works. It gives you a rush of justification, a sense of moral high ground, a reason to withdraw, shut down, or harden up. But over time, it costs you everything. It makes you brittle. It isolates you emotionally. It turns ordinary interactions into sources of tension. You begin to live in a constant state of alertness, scanning for disrespect, bracing for impact. And without realizing it, you confuse defensiveness with strength. Here's the paradox. The more you take things personally, the less safe you actually become. Because real safety doesn't come from preventing discomfort. It comes from knowing who you are, even when discomfort shows up. Before we go any further, take a moment. If this resonates, if you want more content that helps you build quiet strength, emotional discipline, and inner stability, subscribe to Quiet Discipline Method. Your support gives this channel the momentum to keep creating deeper, more transformative videos like this. Now, let's go deeper. Most people don't realize that their reactions aren't chosen, they're inherited. Learned in environments where being misunderstood, criticized, or unseen carried real consequences. Over time, your mind learned a shortcut. If I assume the worst early, I won't be caught off guard later. But that shortcut is outdated. Today, it doesn't protect you. It traps you. And until you understand this, you'll keep fighting battles that were never meant for you. Before we continue, here's a question for you. Answer honestly and comment your choice below. Question: when someone's words hurt you, what feels more true? A, they're attacking me. B, something in me feels threatened. Comment A or B below. Your answer says more about your inner world than you might think. And we'll come back to it as this video unfolds. Most people believe that taking things personally is something that happens to them. As if a comment lands, pain appears, and that's the end of the story. But what actually unfolds inside you is a precise psychological sequence: fast, invisible, and deeply conditioned. It begins before you're even aware of it. The human brain is not designed to seek truth first. It is designed to detect threat. When someone speaks, especially in a way that feels ambiguous, your nervous system immediately asks a silent question: is my value at risk? If the answer feels uncertain, the mind moves to interpretation at lightning speed. This is the first internal move: assumption. You don't wait for clarity. You fill in the gaps. You assume intent. You assume meaning. You assume that the other person is thinking something negative about you. And because this happens beneath conscious awareness, it feels objective, like you're simply reading the situation accurately. In reality, you are reading it through the lens of your own fears. This is where mind reading begins. Not because you are arrogant, but because uncertainty feels unsafe. The brain would rather be wrong than be exposed. Once the assumption is made, the second move follows automatically: moral positioning. In order to stabilize your self image, your mind splits the situation into roles. There is now someone who is wrong, insensitive, careless, or cruel, and someone who has been wronged. This division is subtle but powerful. It allows you to protect your sense of goodness without actually addressing what's happening. At this stage, most people believe they are being mature because they don't react outwardly. But internal aggression is still aggression. It shows up as silent withdrawal, coldness, passive resistance, sarcasm, or emotional distance. You may tell yourself you're letting it go, but internally, you are building a case. And here's why this stage is so seductive. It feels justified. There is a brief sense of relief in believing you are the innocent party. It allows you to avoid vulnerability. You don't have to ask questions. You don't have to risk being misunderstood. You don't have to look inward. The story has already decided who is at fault. But this relief is temporary. The third move is where the cost appears. Because when you avoid direct engagement, the situation doesn't resolve, it loops. Your mind replays the interaction. You imagine alternative responses. You analyze tone, wording, timing. You question yourself. Was I overreacting? Am I too sensitive? Or was that actually disrespectful? This mental cycling creates a background hum of anxiety. You feel unsettled, but you don't know why. You may even feel dramatic, ashamed of how much space this one interaction is taking up in your mind. And yet, you can't stop. This is the hidden consequence of taking things personally. It keeps you psychologically entangled. What began as an attempt to protect yourself turns into prolonged emotional exposure. Instead of one uncomfortable moment, you carry it for hours, days, sometimes years. Relationships become tense not because of what was said, but because of what was never clarified. And beneath all of this is a crucial insight most people miss. Taking things personally is not an immature reaction. It is an undeveloped strategy. It is a way of trying to create safety without the skills to do so directly. Instead of asking, instead of asserting, instead of setting boundaries, the mind chooses control through interpretation. But interpretation is not protection. It is isolation. When you assume instead of clarify, you cut yourself off from truth. When you assign blame instead of understanding roles, you cut yourself off from growth. And when you protect your ego instead of your integrity, you trade short-term comfort for long-term insecurity. The irony is that the more intelligent and self-aware a person is, the more elaborate this internal process can become. High empathy does not prevent taking things personally. It often intensifies it. Because you can imagine many ways you might be failing, and your mind uses that imagination against you. Understanding this mechanism is not about judging yourself. It is about seeing clearly. Because once you see the pattern, you stop identifying with it. You realize that what feels personal is often procedural, a system running in the background, outdated but familiar. And nothing changes until the mechanism is brought into awareness. There is a moment, small, quiet, almost unnoticeable, where everything can change. It happens right after something is said, but before you react. Most people miss this moment entirely. But this is where clarity begins. Every situation contains two layers. The first is what actually happened. The second is the meaning you assign to it. And while the first layer is usually brief and limited, the second can expand endlessly, shaping your emotions, your self-image, and your relationships. Most suffering does not come from events themselves. It comes from the stories we tell about them. When someone makes a comment that unsettles you, your mind immediately starts constructing a narrative. This narrative is fast, emotional, and deeply persuasive. It sounds like insight, but it is interpretation. It sounds like awareness, but it is assumption. And once it forms, it feels personal because it places you at the center of the story. What makes this so difficult to notice is that the mind does not label these thoughts as stories. It presents them as facts. You don't think, I am telling myself a story. You think, I know what they meant. But clarity begins when you learn to pause and ask a different question. Not why did they say that, but what do I actually know for certain? Most of the time, the answer is very little. You know the words that were spoken. You know the tone as you perceived it. You know how you felt afterward. What you do not know is intention, internal state, background context, or the meaning that comment holds for the other person. Yet those unknowns are often treated as settled truths. This is where emotional reactivity gains its power. The mind fills uncertainty with self-referential meaning. It assumes that what was said must be about you, your competence, your character, your worth. But this assumption reveals something important. We only feel threatened in areas where we are already unsure. If someone criticizes a quality you are deeply confident in, the comment passes through you without friction. It may register as inaccurate or irrelevant, but it does not wound. When a comment hurts, it is not because it is true. It is because it touches an unresolved question inside you. Clarity requires the courage to look at that question honestly. Instead of arguing with the story, you examine it. Instead of suppressing the emotion, you trace it back to its source. You begin to see that your reaction says more about your internal landscape than the external event. This is not an act of self-blame. It is an act of self-responsibility. To gain clarity, you must slow the process down. Not to overanalyze, but to interrupt the automatic sequence. Silence is often the most disciplined response, not as avoidance, but as space. Space to breathe, space to observe, space to prevent a temporary emotion from becoming a permanent belief. In that space, curiosity becomes possible. Curiosity asks, what else could be true? Curiosity asks, what might be happening for them that has nothing to do with me? Curiosity loosens the grip of certainty and replaces it with openness. And when clarity is still missing, the most grounded response is direct communication. Not confrontation, not accusation, clarification. Simple, steady questions that seek understanding rather than validation. This is not weakness. It is emotional maturity. Over time, clarity also involves recognizing your patterns. You begin to notice the themes that consistently trigger you: appearance, competence, belonging, intelligence, being valued. These patterns are not flaws, they are signals. They point to areas where your self-concept is still under construction. When you are aware of these sensitivities, the story loses authority. You can say, this reaction makes sense given my history, but it may not reflect reality. That sentence alone creates distance between you and the narrative. Clarity is not about becoming emotionally numb. It is about becoming emotionally accurate. When you stop treating assumptions as facts, your inner world quiets. You no longer have to defend against imagined threats. And in that quiet, something stabilizing happens. You begin to trust yourself. Not because you are always right, but because you can tell the difference between what is happening and what you are telling yourself about it. That difference is where freedom starts. One of the most exhausting mental traps people fall into is the need to decide who is wrong. After an interaction that feels uncomfortable, the mind immediately begins a silent trial. Evidence is gathered, motives are analyzed, tone is replayed, and at the center of it all is a single corrosive question. Is there something wrong with me, or is there something wrong with them? This question feels necessary, but it is deeply misleading. It keeps you locked in a false binary that guarantees inner conflict. Healthy boundaries begin the moment you step out of this courtroom. Boundaries are not walls. They are not punishments. They are not emotional distance disguised as strength. Boundaries are clarity about responsibility. They define where you end and where another person begins. Without them, you either absorb what does not belong to you or try to manage what you cannot control. Most people do both. When someone behaves poorly, insensitively, or irrationally, the instinct is to internalize it. You search for the flaw in yourself that explains their behavior. Or you swing in the opposite direction and make it your mission to change them, correct them, or prove them wrong. Both responses cross a boundary. The truth is simpler and more uncomfortable. Much of what people do has nothing to do with you. People speak sharply because they are overwhelmed. They withdraw because they lack emotional skills. They criticize because they are insecure. They fail to consider your needs because they are consumed by their own. None of this excuses harmful behavior, but it does explain why taking responsibility for it will never bring you peace. A boundary recognizes this distinction. There are moments when an interaction is not about you at all. In those moments, the most disciplined response is to let it pass through without attaching your identity to it. You do not need to correct every misunderstanding. You do not need to earn fairness from those who cannot offer it. Releasing the urge to manage other people's inner worlds is not indifference, it is wisdom. But boundaries are not avoidance. There are also moments when feedback, discomfort, or tension does involve you, and this is where many people either collapse into shame or jump into defense. Both reactions are rooted in the same fear. If I acknowledge fault, I lose worth. This fear turns growth into a threat. A healthy boundary allows you to separate your behavior from your identity. You can acknowledge a misstep without labeling yourself as deficient. You can receive feedback without interpreting it as rejection. This requires a level of emotional independence that many people were never taught. When something is about you, the question is not, am I bad? The question is, what part of this is mine to own? Ownership does not mean self-attack. It means responsibility without self-erasure. You look at your role clearly, without exaggeration or minimization. You learn, you adjust, and you move forward without dragging the weight of self-judgment behind you. This is where control becomes properly placed. You cannot control how others speak, think, or behave. Trying to do so will only entangle you further. You can control how you respond, what you tolerate, and what you invest energy into. Boundaries redirect your focus from external management to internal alignment. This shift is subtle but transformative. Instead of rehearsing arguments in your head, you decide what behavior you will engage with. Instead of hoping others will change, you change how available you are to patterns that drain you. Instead of defining yourself by how others treat you, you define yourself by how you treat yourself. Many people believe boundaries will make them colder or less compassionate. In reality, the opposite is true. Without boundaries, resentment builds quietly. With boundaries, interactions become cleaner, simpler, and more honest. You stop over-explaining. You stop absorbing unnecessary guilt. You stop living in reaction. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about keeping yourself intact. When you know what is yours to carry and what is not, emotional clarity follows. You are no longer tangled in the impossible task of fixing, pleasing, or being understood by everyone. You conserve energy for what actually matters, your values, your growth, your integrity. And in that conservation, something unexpected happens. The need to take things personally begins to fade. Not because people become easier, but because you finally understand where your responsibility ends. That understanding is not loud. It does not announce itself, but it is steady. And it is one of the most stabilizing forces a person can develop. At the deepest level, taking things personally is not about what others say or do. It is about what you believe would collapse inside you if their words were true. Beneath defensiveness, beneath analysis, beneath the need to explain or withdraw, there is a quieter fear. What if this says something unbearable about who I am? This is why the final shift cannot be cognitive alone. It must be structural. When your sense of worth depends on external approval, every interaction becomes a referendum on your value. Praise feels like relief. Criticism feels like danger. Indifference feels like erasure. In this state, you are never fully at rest because your identity is always being negotiated outside of you. This is not a character flaw. It is a learned orientation. Many people grow up believing that being good enough is conditional. Conditional on performance. Conditional on likability, conditional on meeting expectations that were never clearly defined. Over time, the nervous system adapts. It learns to scan constantly for signals of acceptance or rejection. And without realizing it, you begin outsourcing your self-worth. This is where taking things personally becomes chronic. A solid sense of self-worth does not mean believing you are flawless. It means your value is not up for debate every time you make a mistake. It means feedback can be processed without threatening your identity. It means discomfort no longer equals danger. The shift begins when you stop asking, how do I get people to treat me better? And start asking, what kind of person am I committed to being? This question changes everything. When your self-worth is rooted in values rather than validation, your center of gravity moves inward. You are no longer defined by how others respond to you, but by how consistently you live in alignment with what matters to you. Integrity becomes the stabilizer. Direction replaces approval. This does not make you immune to criticism. It makes you resilient to it. You begin to understand that feedback is information, not identity. Some of it will be useful. Some of it will be noise. Your task is not to absorb all of it, nor to reject all of it, but to discern. Discernment requires self-trust. Self-trust grows when your actions match your values. If you value honesty and you act honestly, you feel grounded, even when misunderstood. If you value growth and you are actively learning, you feel stable, even when corrected. If you value kindness and you show up with care, you can tolerate moments when others do not reciprocate. This is why perfection never creates safety. It keeps you chasing an unreachable standard. Growth, on the other hand, creates orientation. You know where you are headed, even when you stumble. When your identity is anchored in direction rather than approval, something profound happens. The emotional charge of other people's behavior diminishes, not because you stop caring, but because you stop equating their reactions with your worth. You still listen, you still reflect, but you no longer collapse inward. This is what emotional security actually looks like. Quiet, internal, self-referential. You do not need everyone to agree with you to feel okay. You do not need to defend every misinterpretation. You do not need to be perfectly understood to remain intact. Your sense of self is no longer borrowed, and paradoxically, this inner solidity makes you more open, not less. When you are not protecting a fragile self-image, you can be curious. You can admit uncertainty. You can receive correction without humiliation. You can let go of what is not yours without resentment. Vulnerability becomes possible because your core no longer feels at risk. This is the kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not rely on dominance or withdrawal. It does not require control. It is felt as steadiness, as the ability to stay present when things are uncomfortable, as the capacity to remain kind without self-betrayal. When self-worth is internalized, taking things personally loses its function. There is nothing left to defend in the old way. You are no longer fighting to prove you are enough. You are living from the assumption that you are a work in progress, and that is sufficient. This does not make life painless, but it makes it honest. And honesty, grounded in values and self-respect, creates a kind of safety that no amount of external validation ever could. Taking things personally was never the real problem. It was the symptom. The deeper issue has always been where your sense of safety lives. When safety depends on how others speak, behave, or perceive you, every interaction becomes unstable ground. But when safety is built on clarity, boundaries, and self-worth, the noise of the world loses its power over you. You stop reacting automatically. You stop defending imagined threats. You start responding from intention instead of fear. This shift doesn't make life easier, but it makes you steadier. And steadiness is what allows growth, connection, and inner peace to coexist. The deeper lesson and how to apply it, the core lesson is this. Emotional pain intensifies when your identity is externally anchored. To apply this in daily life, practice separating feedback from self-worth. When triggered, pause before reacting, ask what belongs to you to learn, and release what does not. Choose actions aligned with your values rather than chasing approval. Over time, this builds internal stability, so your peace no longer depends on other people's behavior. Simple question for you. Do you think your peace today depends more on your inner standards or on how others treat you? Please comment inner standards or others treatment below so we can all reflect and learn from each other's perspectives. If this video helped you think more clearly about yourself, please subscribe to Quiet Discipline Method. Your support helps the channel stay focused on creating deeper, more meaningful content for the next videos.